Before we drift into tonight's tale of the entire story of Lumpy Space Princess, LSP, I'd love to know where in the world are you watching from tonight? And what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments below. It's always magical, seeing how far and wide this sleepy little community reaches. All right, lights low, blankets up, let's begin. We start tonight's story not in the rolling hills of Ooh, nor in the familiar Candy Kingdom, but in a place that feels as though it floats just beyond the edge of understanding. A strange pocket of the universe where gravity dips and bends, where clouds aren't just vapor, but living, lumpy forms of matter. This is Lumpy Space, a realm suspended in its own dimension, shimmering in the cosmic night like a bruise-colored bubble, pulsing faintly with otherworldly energy. Lumpy Space isn't like other lands. It has a curious geography, soft and uneven, made of great swelling lumps that drift together and apart as if the very world is breathing. There's a constant haze of pink and purple hue, glowing dimly under a sky that seems to have no sun, no moon, only a perpetual twilight. Time moves differently there, in a way that feels slippery, as though days and nights dissolve into one another without sharp distinction. It is within this dreamy yet chaotic realm that our princess was born. Lumpy Space Princess, known to most as simply LSP, is the daughter of the Lumpy Space King and Queen. From the very beginning, she stood out, not only because she was royal, but because her personality seemed even louder than the strange world that cradled her. Where her home was soft and uncertain, she was sharp, dramatic, and certain of her. Imagine a child raised in a land where the ground beneath your feet is never quite stable, where conversations are peppered with strange slang and rules that make sense only if you live within that lumpy logic. Lumpy Space Society has its own way of being, one that feels alien to outsiders. The people themselves, lumpen in form, speak with an air of superiority and sass, and yet there is a playful in them too. To be raised as a princess in such a place meant LSP grew up learning how to demand attention, how to stand tall or as tall as a cloud-like form could, among beings who were already loud and confident. Her parents, the king and queen, held authority in their realm, though their rule was not the orderly structure we might imagine in a more traditional kingdom. In Lumpy Space, rules feel more like suggestion, constantly shifting as if the laws of their world were as lumpy as its ground. The king and queen were still figures of importance, however, and their daughter's place was secured as royalty. But LSP was never one to quietly accept her role. From her earliest days, she showed signs of rebellion. While other princesses across Ooh might have been delicate or refined, LSP carried herself with a kind of chaotic independence. She was brash, outspoken, and never afraid to call things as she saw them, even when her words cut against tradition. It wasn't just a matter of being spoiled or demanding, though at times she could be both. There was something deeper at play, something shaped by the very world she came from. Lumpy Space itself seems to mirror her inner nature. It is imperfect, uneven, and unstable, yet also strangely beautiful and full of life. The lumps that define the landscape are not flaws, but the very essence of the place. They give it shape, texture, and uniqueness. And in that way, LSP herself is the perfect child of her homeland. Her lumps, her dramatics, her unpredictable moods, they are the living embodiment of the world she comes from. One can almost imagine that Lumpy Space whispered to her as she grew, teaching her in ways beyond words, teaching her that perfection was overrated, that smoothness was dull, that to be bumpy and strange was to have character. She learned, perhaps unconsciously, that her lumps were not something to hide, but something to flaunt. Where other princesses wore crowns and jewels to show their status, LSP wore her lumps proudly, as though they were ornaments bestowed upon her by the cosmos itself. Still, being royalty came with pressure. Her parents expected her to carry herself with dignity, to uphold the traditions of their lumpy court. Yet LSP never seemed to fully fit into that mold. She was too restless, too hungry for her own voice, to simply echo the expectations of her family. When you look at her story in its entirety, you can see that this was the first crack that set her on the path of independence. She wasn't just a princess born into a strange, floating kingdom. She was a spirit that longed to break free, to tumble into other worlds and write her story with her own messy hand. But before we follow her into exile and adventure, it's important to linger a little longer here in her birthplace. Because Lumpy Space is not merely a background, it is a character in her story, a mirror of who she is. Think of it as a place where the cosmic meets the absurd. The dimension itself feels like a dream you might have after a long night, half forgotten by morning, with images of floating lumps, endless twilight, and conversations that make sense in the moment but drift into nonsense upon waking. Yet somehow, within that surreal fog, real emotions take root. Love, rivalry, drama, and family obligations, all the things that shape a person, are just as alive there as they are in Ooh. And in the heart of it, our princess began to form, carrying within her both the comedy and the chaos of her homeland. The Lumpy Space Court, if it can even be called that, was not the polished, regal setting we might picture in other kingdoms. There were no gilded halls, no marble floors, no glittering chandeliers. Instead, the royal gatherings were often held on uneven platforms of lumpy matter, glowing faintly in shades of lavender and violet. The king and queen presided over these assemblies with an air of authority, but it was an authority wrapped in eccentricity. They, too, were lumpy in body and in spirit, embodying the same strange mixture of comedy and command that defined their daughter. In such an environment, it's no surprise that LSP developed her unique voice. Surrounded by citizens who valued wit, sass, and quick tongues, she learned early that words could be a weapon as much as a shield. Her sharpness, her ability to declare her feelings loudly and without filter, was less a rebellion and more a skill honed within the culture of her people. Lumpy Space was not a world that rewarded silence. It was a place where being heard was survival. And so, from her earliest days, LSP learned not only to speak, but to dominate a room with her presence. Still, even within this lively society, the burden of being a princess weighed on her. The king and queen, as loving as they may have been in their own lumpy way, expected LSP to eventually take her role seriously, to represent the dignity of their dimension when needed. But dignity was never LSP's strength. She didn't want to sit through tedious ceremonies or maintain the delicate balance of politics between her people and outsiders. She wanted to live, to feel, to express herself without restraint. And yet, there was affection between them. LSP's parents, though often exasperated, indulged her antics more than they should have. Perhaps they understood, at least on some level, that their daughter was not meant to be confined by the rules of their realm. She was restless in ways they never had been, and though they tried to guide her, there was always an unspoken awareness that one day she might step away from her birthright entirely. If we imagine the LSP as a young princess, we might see her drifting along the uneven terrain of her homeland, complaining about rules and expectations, sighing dramatically at every minor inconvenience. To the outside world, it may look like self-indulgent, but within that behavior lies something deeper, a longing to define herself beyond her lumps, beyond her crown, beyond the destiny others assumed for her. The very air of Lumpy Space seemed to encourage this restlessness. Unlike Ooh, where forests and kingdoms lie in stable, grounded places, Lumpy Space is suspended in a way that feels impermanent. There's a sense that at any moment it could dissolve or shift or slip away into nothing. Growing up in such a realm may have taught LSP that permanence is an illusion, that life itself is meant to be dramatic, unstable, and ever-changing. It is not surprising, then, that she would come to embody these qualities so vividly. But her lumps themselves also deserve reflection. To us, they might look comical or imperfect, and in many stories she is mocked or underestimated because of them. Yet in Lumpy Space, lumps are not flaws. They are the defining feature, the source of beauty and identity. Every citizen wears their lumps like a badge of belonging. For LSP, this physicality was both a gift and a burden. A gift because she inherited the proud form of her people, a burden because outside her homeland, lumps marked her as different, strange, and sometimes laughable. It is here, at the beginning of her story, that the symbolic nature of her form becomes clear. Her lumps are more than just a funny design. They are metaphors for imperfection, for the parts of ourselves that don't quite fit into smooth expectations. In Ooh, she will later be seen as odd, even grotesque at times. But in her homeland, her lumps were a crown all their own, proof that she was one with the people. And perhaps, deep inside, she never fully lets go of that identity even when she leaves. Growing up under the shadow of her parents' rule, LSP must have wrestled with what it meant to be both ordinary and extraordinary. Ordinary because, in Lumpy Space, everyone is lumpy, everyone is loud, everyone is dramatic. Extraordinary because she was the princess, destined to carry on the lineage of her family. That tension, between wanting to blend in and wanting to stand out, would define much of her life. It is a tension many of us feel in our own ways, and it is part of why LSP's story resonates more deeply than her comedic surface might suggest. As she grew older, her personality sharpened. She became bolder in defying her parents, more flamboyant in declaring her independence, more eager to escape the confines of her homeland. While the king and queen may have tolerated her antics, the larger society of Lumpy Space likely whispered about her behind closed doors. To them, she was both the embodiment of their culture and a disruption to it, a princess who fit and didn't fit at the same time. And so, before LSP ever set foot in Ooh, before she began her misadventures and friendships, her story had already begun to take shape. The foundation of her character, dramatic, rebellious, imperfect, yet deeply authentic, was laid in those early days. A princess of lumps, born into a world that taught her to see imperfection as identity and drama as survival. When we imagine LSP's earliest years in more detail, it's easy to see how her sense of identity grew complicated. In the court of the Lumpy King and Queen, she had everything a princess could ask for: recognition, security, and status. But the strange thing about Lumpy Space is that wealth and power aren't expressed the way they are in other kingdoms. There are no towers of gold or armies of guards. The power of royalty here lies in present, in the way you carry yourself among the lumpy masses, in how loudly and confidently you can assert your will. This may be why LSP learned so quickly to exaggerate her emotion. In Lumpy Space, to be quiet is to disappear. And for a princess, someone expected to lead and represent, vanishing into the background was never an option. LSP's loudness, her dramatics, her flair for overreaction, all trace back to this environment where visibility was survival. Every sigh, every declaration of despair or triumph was not only a personal expression, but also a performance meant to secure her place in a court that was as unstable as the ground it stood on. Still, there is something more intimate at work in her childhood. Behind the exaggerated eye rolls and flamboyant speeches, there must have been moments of softness, times when LSP, away from the expectations of her parents and peers, stared out into the endless twilight of her world and wondered what else might exist. She lived in a dimension that floated apart from Ooh, accessible only by hidden portals, and the knowledge of those other lands must have stirred her imagination. If lumps defined her world, what defined the smooth lands beyond? If her people lived in perpetual twilight, what would it feel like to stand under the bright sun of Ooh or see the stars from its mountains? These quiet curiosities are easy to forget when we focus on her more comedic outbursts later in life, but they are essential to her story. Beneath her bluster, LSP has always been driven by a search for belonging. That seed was planted in her homeland, where even as a princess, she felt like she didn't quite fit into the lumpy mold her parents hoped she would inherit. Her relationship with the king and queen adds another layer. Though not shown often in the series, we catch glimpses of their dynamic. The king, stern yet quirky, and the queen, equally dramatic in her own way, expected their daughter to reflect the values of their people. But LSP's energy always seemed to overflow the boundaries set for her. At court gatherings, one can imagine her cutting off her parents mid-sentence, turning attention back to herself, insisting her opinion's the only one that mattered. Her parents may have sighed in frustration, but they allowed it, perhaps even admired her brazenness, even if it terrified the future of their kingdom. What's fascinating is how this environment forged her dual nature. On one hand, she was supremely confident, secure in the knowledge that she was a princess, beloved or at least tolerated by her people. On the other hand, she was restless, unsatisfied, craving a stage bigger than Lumpy Space itself. Her home may have built her confidence, but it also built her dissatisfaction. When every citizen is lumpy and loud, how does one princess stand apart? There is also the peculiar metaphysics of Lumpy Space to consider. This is a dimension where contact with its citizens can transform outsiders, spreading lumps like a kind of magical infection. That fact alone paints Lumpy Space as a place of blurred boundaries, where identity itself is contagious. Growing up in such a realm must have shaped LSP's view of. If lumps could spread, then perhaps being lumpy was not just a personal trait, but a universal possibility. It gave her a sense of superiority. Lumps were something anyone could catch, but also a sense of fragility. If her identity could spread so easily, what did it mean for her uniqueness? This question may have lingered in her subconscious, fueling her dramatic insistence on being noticed, remembered, and admired. She had to prove that she was not just another lumpy citizen. She was the Lumpy Space Princess, singular and irreplaceable. The geography of her homeland reinforced this urgency. Unlike the sprawling kingdoms of Ooh, which felt permanent and grounded, Lumpy Space was always shifting. Platforms drifted and collided, lumps grew and shrank without warning, and the horizon itself seemed to pulse with irregular energy. Nothing there was built to last. It was a world in flux, and for someone like LSP, who craved permanence in the form of recognition, this instability must have been maddening. Perhaps, deep down, she longed to escape to a world that felt more solid, even if she could never quite belong there. And yet, despite her restlessness, there were lessons Lumpy Space gave her that she would carry forever. The most important of these is the embrace of imperfection. In a world made of lumps, where smoothness is foreign and alien, imperfection is not just tolerated, but celebrated. That ethos defined LSP's personality in profound ways. It is why she could stand proudly in her lumpy form, why she could declare her flaws openly without shame, and why she could mock the polished lives of others with such biting humor. She had been raised in a culture that told her from the start that to be lumpy was to be beautiful. This is what makes LSP such a fascinating character. She embodies a philosophy born of her homeland, even as she rebels against it. She is both a child of Lumpy Space and its sharpest critic, loving and hating it in equal measure. It shaped her lumps, her voice, her confidence, her defiance, and yet it also drove her to seek something beyond its hazy twilight. So, as we pause here in the early days of her story, we can see how the paradox of Lumpy Space created the paradox of LSP herself, a princess raised to be proud of her lumps, yet restless in her desire to escape, a child of twilight yearning for brighter horizon, a figure shaped by instability, desperate to find stability elsewhere. Her beginnings are not just the story of a princess. They are the story of a realm that defined her, and a restless heart that could never stay confined within it. When we think about a character like Lumpy Space Princess, it's tempting to reduce her to her loudest moment, the eye rolls, the dramatic outbursts, the declarations that everything is so unfair. But when we sit with her story more slowly, as we are tonight, we realize that those behaviors are rooted in something deeper. They are echoes of her upbringing, of a world that is itself loud, unstable, and defiantly imperfect. To understand LSP is to understand that she is not just dramatic for comedies. She is dramatic because drama was the rhythm of her homeland. The question then arises, what does it mean to grow up in a place like Lumpy Space and then step beyond it? For most of its citizens, lumps are destined. They live and die within their dimension, content with the twilight that surrounds them. For LSP, however, that was never enough. Even as a young princess, she must have sensed that her story would stretch farther than the horizon of her lumpy home. Perhaps she didn't know what that meant yet, but the pull of adventure was already within her. The strange nature of Lumpy Space gave her a kind of resilience that would later serve her well. Imagine a child learning to walk on uneven ground that shifts beneath her, where every step could tilt or wobble unexpectedly. The child would grow into someone who adapts quickly, who never expects their life to be smooth, who assumes that change and instability are normal. This perspective became the backbone of LSP's personality. She learned to navigate chaos with chaos, to meet instability with exaggerated confidence. In a way, she became a survivalist of emotions, ready to defend herself, sharp words and bigger feelings than anyone around her. Her royal status meant that she was also never truly ordinary. While other lumpy children might have blended into the twilight crowd, LSP was always watched, always judged, always compared. In a dimension that thrives on loudness, being the loudest was her crown, and she wore it fiercely, but that crown came with cracks. Being the center of attention can feel exhilarating, but it can also feel suffocating. And for LSP, who both loved and hated her royal role, those cracks eventually widened into a deep restlessness. We might imagine her gazing through the shimmering portals that connected Lumpy Space to other dimensions, catching glimpses of Ooh with its mountains, forests, and strange kingdom. Each glimpse must have stirred something inside her, not just curiosity, yearning. To leave her twilight home was to risk losing her crown, her title, her safety. Yet the pull of the unknown can be irresistible, especially for someone who already feels out of place in her own world. It is important to notice, too, the paradox of her relationship with imperfection. On one hand, she was raised to embrace her lumps, to see them as marks of identity and beauty. On the other, she longed for recognition that went beyond them, for love and validation that didn't simply hinge on her being the lumpy one. This paradox would follow her throughout her adventures. Wherever she went, her lumps were both her pride and her burden, symbols of home, but also reminders of how different she was from the smooth-skinned people of Ooh. When viewed this way, her story begins to feel almost archetypal. LSP is not just a comic character with over-the-top antics. She is the restless royal, the one who cannot remain in the kingdom where she was born. Her lumps, her flaws, her insecurities, all become part of a larger narrative of exile, independence, and eventual growth. She embodies the age-old story of leaving home to find oneself, told through the surreal lens of a princess made of floating lump. But before she leaves, we must linger a final moment in her homeland. Lumpy Space itself deserves to be remembered here at the beginning. Its soft clouds of uneven matter, its endless twilight, its drifting platforms where conversations echo in voices both shrill and affectionate. It is a world that feels silly on the surface, yet carries with it a profound symbolism. In its very nature, it reminds us that perfection is not the only way to exist, that lumps and flaws and jagged edges can create a world just as beautiful as any kingdom of crystal or candy. For LSP, this was the soil from which she grew. She is, in every sense, a child of lumps, dramatic, flawed, proud, and alive with restless energy. To understand her later adventures, we must hold on to this image, a young princess standing on the uneven ground of her homeland, crowned not with jewels, but with the lumps that define her, gazing outward into the unknown. Because soon she will step beyond her twilight home. Soon she will trade the familiarity of her lumpy kingdom for the uncertain adventures of Ooh. And in doing so, she will transform from a royal daughter into something more complicated, more fascinating, and more human. But those later chapters are for another time. For now, we leave her here in the origins of her story, surrounded by the hazy glow of Lumpy Space, a place of imperfection, of comedy, of strange beauty, a place that made her who she is, the one and only Lumpy Space princess. Life in Lumpy Space was anything but ordinary. Imagine a kingdom where the very ground beneath you was soft, uneven, and full of clouds that weren't clouds at all, but dense lumps of floating matter. This was the place Lumpy Space Princess called home, and it was a world as strange and unique as she was. Being born into the royal family made her life different in the very beginning. She wasn't just another lumpy citizen. She was a princess, the daughter of the Lumpy Space King and Queen, and that meant expectations, rules, and responsibilities that she didn't always want to follow. Growing up as royalty in Lumpy Space came with both privileges and pressure. On one hand, she was surrounded by comfort. Her family ruled the realm, and she was never without food, shelter, or the attention of those around her. On the other hand, LSP never liked to be told what to do. Her independent, dramatic personality often clashed with the order her parents tried to impose. When her parents wanted her to act regal, she wanted to be wild and carefree. When they wanted her to stay in the palace, she wanted to go out and mingle with the other lumps, live freely, and make her own rule. It was this stubborn streak that made her childhood stand out. While other princesses in the land of Ooh, like Princess Bubblegum, grew up with a strong sense of duty and leadership, Lumpy Space Princess leaned into her feeling. She lived loudly, with every emotion at full volume. If she was happy, she wanted everyone to know it. If she was upset, her whole world stopped until she could express her frustration. And if she felt misunderstood, she'd retreat dramatically, making sure her absence was felt as much as her presence had been. Still, being a princess meant being part of the larger political and magical web of Ooh. Lumpy Space itself was a mysterious place, existing in its own dimension, connected to Ooh through portals. Because of that, her family often interacted with the other kingdoms and their rulers. From early on, LSP understood that she was not just any lumpy citizen. She represented her entire people. That knowledge both irritated her and gave her pride. She loved the idea of being important, but she bristled at the responsibility it carried. Her parents, the king and queen, loved her but struggled to contain her fiery independence. They expected her to follow certain rules of etiquette, to uphold tradition, and to keep the dignity of their family name. But LSP had little interest in these things. She wanted freedom more than protocol, and that desire for freedom became one of the defining features of her life as a princess. At the same time, her role gave her a confidence that few others had. She never hesitated to speak her mind, even if it meant clashing with her parents or standing apart from her peers. Some of this came from the security of knowing she was royalty. Deep down, she believed that being a princess gave her the right to live her life however she wanted, and she wielded that belief like a shield whenever she felt criticized. But beneath the drama and the declarations of independence, there was a softer truth. Being a princess made her feel different, sometimes even lonely. While she pretended not to care, there were moments when she longed to be understood, to have friends who accepted her for who she was rather than the title she carried. This desire for connection would eventually shape many of her choices, especially when she began leaving Lumpy Space behind to spend more time in Ooh. Life as a princess, then, was a balancing act for Lumpy Space Princess. She enjoyed the attention, the confidence, and the recognition her title brought. Yet she also struggled with the weight of expectation and the loneliness of being set apart. This tension between freedom and responsibility would follow her throughout her story, coloring the way she interacted with others and shaping the arc of her life. As the days passed in Lumpy Space, LSP grew into her role in her own way. She wasn't the kind of princess who wanted to rule with laws or lead with wisdom. She was a princess who led with her feelings, her instincts, and her determination to live life on her own terms. And while that often caused friction with her family, it also made her unforgettable. The world outside her kingdom was vast, full of strange lands, magical creatures, and adventures waiting to happen. And though she was raised in a place where lumps ruled the sky, her heart was already pulling her towards something more. The stage of her life as a princess was only the beginning, a foundation that would explain the choices she later made, the struggles she faced, and the way she carved out her place in the land of Ooh. Because being Lumpy Space Princess wasn't just about holding a title. It was about learning who she was, what she wanted, and how to live unapologetically, even when that meant clashing with her world, her parents, and sometimes her friends. Life in Lumpy Space had its own rhythm, a kind of strange floating dance that matched the world's uneven surfaces and unpredictable skies. For most of her people, that rhythm was comforting. They drifted, they mingled, they laughed in their lumpy voices, and they went about their lives in an easygoing, almost carefree way. But for Lumpy Space Princess, that rhythm was never enough. She always felt like she was meant for something more, as if her story couldn't just stay contained within the boundaries of her cloudy, uneven kingdom. Being a princess meant she was often at the center of attention. Wherever she went, eyes followed her. Her friends, other young lumps, saw her as both a peer and someone untouchable, wrapped in the glow of royalty. Some admired her, others envied her, and a few resented her when she complained about her royal responsibilities. After all, from the outside, her life seemed charmed. She had a home in a floating palace, parents who ruled the realm, and access to places and privileges others couldn't imagine. But what others didn't see was the way those privileges often felt like chains. LSP was told where she could go, what she should wear, how she ought to behave. Her parents tried to mold her into a version of a princess that reflected tradition and order. Yet LSP's spirit simply wasn't built for that. She longed to be wild, to test boundaries, to have her feelings spill out in dramatic bursts without anyone trying to push them back down. It was in these early days that her dramatic flair first took root. When she felt stifled by the rules of the palace, she would stage little rebellion. She would run off to meet her friends, throwing herself into the social whirl of teenage lump life. There, away from her parents' watchful eyes, she could talk about crushes, gossip about the latest happenings in OO, and dream out loud about what her future might hold. These rebellions weren't just acts of defiance. They were also her way of carving out an identity separate from her royal role. Lumpy Space Princess wanted people to see her for who she was, a girl with big feelings, a sharp tongue, and a heart that craved recognition, rather than just the title she carried. This was a struggle many royals in OO dealt with. But in LSP's case, her dramatic personality made the tension much louder, much more noticeable, and often much more entertaining. One of the places where her royal status was most visible was during gatherings with other kingdoms. When her parents hosted or attended cross-kingdom events, LSP was expected to play the part of a proper princess. She would be dressed in her finest lumpy attire, standing alongside her family as they exchanged pleasantries with rulers like Princess Bubblegum or even the odd eccentric characters from other corners of OO. To her parents, these were moments to uphold the dignity of Lumpy Space. To LSP, however, they were excruciating. She often felt out of place, like she didn't quite belong in the polished, diplomatic atmosphere. While other princesses might smile politely and speak with grace, LSP's natural instinct was to roll her eyes, sigh dramatically, and let everyone know exactly how bored she was. And yet, even in those moments of protest, there was something undeniably magnetic about her presence. LSP had a way of drawing attention no matter where she was. People might shake their heads at her antics, but they couldn't ignore her. Whether she was sulking in a corner, interrupting conversations with her booming voice, or storming off in frustration, she commanded the room in her own lumpy way. Her parents didn't always appreciate this kind of spotlight, but deep down, LSP relished it. For her, being noticed was almost as important as being free. She didn't want to fade into the background like a dutiful royal figure. She wanted people to feel her emotions, to react to her presence, to remember her long after she had left the room. It was this love of attention, coupled with her rejection of royal expectation, that shaped her life in Lumpy Space. She learned early on that her title could open doors, but it couldn't define her spirit. She might be a princess, but she was determined to live like a person first. A person with flaws, passions, crushes, and dreams that didn't always fit into the neat boxes of royal duty. And so as she grew older, Lumpy Space Princess began drifting further from the palace walls. She would spend more time among her peers, testing friendship, starting drama, and searching for a sense of belonging that her royal title never gave her. These experiences made her messy, complicated, and sometimes hard to love, but they also made her real. Because life as a princess wasn't just about wearing a crown or living in a palace. For LSP, it was about wrestling with the space between who she was expected to be and who she truly wanted to become. And in that space, she began shaping the unpredictable, unforgettable story that would follow her throughout her life. The palace in Lumpy Space was always full of expectation. From the moment LSP floated into a room, her parents' watchful eyes followed her, weighing whether she would behave like the princess they hoped she could be. They wanted her to be refined, to carry herself with dignity, to echo the grace of other royal figures across Ooh. But that image never sat comfortably with her. LSP wasn't delicate or strained. She was loud, expressive, and unafraid to let her feelings spill over like a storm across the lumpy horizon. Her parents, the king and queen of Lumpy Space, didn't quite know what to do with her. They cared for her deeply, but they also carried the heavy responsibility of maintaining their realm's order. To them, LSP's fiery emotions were disruptive, unpredictable, even dangerous in their own strange way. They would lecture her on the duties of a princess, reminding her of the respect her title demanded. Yet each lecture only seemed to push her further away, fanning the flames of resistance. There's a gentle irony in these moments. The very thing that made her so different, so unwilling to conform, was also what made her uniquely suited to represent Lumpy Space. While her parents saw her as reckless, she was, in truth, the purest reflection of the realm's chaotic, lumpy nature. She embodied the unevenness, the unpredictability, and the refusal to be smoothed into something ordinary. As she floated through her adolescence, her friendships became both her anchor and her battlefield. Among other young lumps, she was a leader of sorts, not because she followed rules or offered guidance, but because she carried an energy that drew others in. She spoke her mind without filter, made bold declarations about love and life, and reacted to everything with dramatic intensity. To her friends, this was both thrilling and exhausting. They never quite knew if an afternoon with LSP would end in laughter, tears, or a sudden outburst of anger. Those friendships were often tested because LSP's temper burned bright. She could be quick to take offense, quick to accuse, quick to storm away in indignation. Yet just as quickly, she would return, seeking forgiveness, craving affection, wanting desperately to be understood. Her lumps might have made her body uneven, but her heart was equally full of rough edges and soft spots, all jumbled together in a way that made her deeply, undeniably human. When gatherings were held in the palace, she often felt trapped. The halls filled with lumpy courtiers and floating guests, their conversations blending into a kind of droning hum. LSP would hover nearby, wearing her finest accessory, trying to look the part her parents wished she could play. But the weight of expectation pressed against her like an invisible tether. She would look around at the smiling faces, the polite exchanges, the endless repetition of royal formality, and feel a yawning emptiness inside. That emptiness pushed her to rebel in little ways. She would slip away from the palace after dark, floating through the strange purple skies to meet her friends at the edges of the kingdom. They would gossip, share stories, and laugh until their voices echoed across the lumpy hills. These were the moments when she felt most alive, most herself. Out there, away from the throne, she wasn't just a princess. She was Lumpy Space Princess, dramatic, flawed, radiant in her own chaotic way. Her relationship with her parents grew more strained as these nights of rebellion became more frequent. The king and queen wanted stability, and their daughter seemed determined to bring the opposite. They couldn't understand why she resisted so strongly, why she wouldn't embrace the privileges laid before her. From their perspective, she had everything she could possibly need. From hers, it felt like she had everything but freedom. It was during these years that her dramatic voice, full of sighs, groans, and exaggerated declarations, became her most recognizable trait. To many in Ooh, that voice was a source of comedy, but within the walls of the palace it was a symbol of resistance, a reminder that their daughter refused to be silenced. Each drawn-out word, each dramatic protest, was her way of announcing to the world, "I am more than the role you've written for me." Her friendships also introduced her to the idea of other kingdoms. Through gossip and stories, she learned of Princess Bubblegum's orderly candy kingdom, of Marceline's adventures across the land, and of Finn and Jake's quests beyond the borders of Lumpy Space. These tales painted Ooh as a place of endless possibility, where freedom could be found beyond the floating, lumpy horizon. LSP began to dream of life outside her homeland, imagining adventures where she wouldn't be bound by her parents' rule. In many ways, her youth in Lumpy Space was a tug-of-war between belonging and freedom. She loved her home, its odd beauty, and the friends she had there. But she also felt stifled by it, unable to stretch her wings or lumps into the wider world. That tension simmered within her, shaping her into the princess we would later see wandering the wilds of Ooh, searching for herself in ways both hilarious and heartbreakingly real. Because beneath all the drama, all the exaggerated flair, was a truth that many of us can quietly relate to. The desire to be seen for who we really are, not for the titles or roles others place upon us. And for Lumpy Space Princess, that desire was strong enough to push her away from the comforts of her crown, toward the unknown paths that awaited her beyond the borders of her kingdom. As the seasons of her youth drifted onward, Lumpy Space Princess began to feel the quiet weight of time pressing against her. Each passing year seemed to come with a greater expectation from her parents and her kingdom, yet her heart only grew more restless. The palace, with all its floating towers and glittering gatherings, felt less like a home and more like a cage. The parties, the formalities, the endless routines of diplomacy, all of it was meant to affirm her role as the heir to Lumpy Space, and yet none of it affirmed the restless, untamed soul within her. In those long, lumpy evenings when the skies glowed with shifting purples and the air hummed with a strange, dreamy stillness, she would sometimes float away from the palace balconies to watch the horizon. Beyond the misty borders of her world, the unknown stretched on, vast and inviting. She imagined what it might be like to drift into Ooh, to meet new people, to stumble into adventures unscripted by her royal lineage. These daydreams weren't just idle fancies. They became her fuel, the spark that kept her from sinking entirely into the expectations surrounding her. And yet, leaving was easier dreamed than done. Her parents reminded her constantly of her duties, of her responsibility to carry forward their legacy. They weren't unkind, but their words carried the firm weight of tradition. The throne wasn't just theirs, it would one day be hers, whether she wanted it or not. Each reminder deepened the conflict inside her, the pull between loyalty to her family and loyalty to herself. This conflict spilled out in ways both dramatic and poignant. At palace gatherings, she grew bolder in her defiance, rolling her eyes at her parents' speeches, interrupting conversation, or slipping away mid-ceremony to join her friends outside. Her peers found it thrilling. Here was a princess unafraid to reject the stiff roles of royalty, but her parents saw only trouble. Arguments grew sharper, her sighs grew louder, and the gap between them widened like a rift in the cloudy skies. What's striking about this stage of her life is how deeply human it feels. Though she floated in a realm unlike any other, her struggles mirrored those of countless children growing into adulthood. The desire to honor one's parents while also seeking independence, the fear of being trapped in roles that don't fit, the yearning for authenticity over obligation. These are feelings we recognize wrapped here in the strange, lumpy glow of her world. In the quiet of her room, surrounded by the uneven surfaces of her home, she would sometimes whisper her frustrations into the air. Why couldn't they see her for who she was? Why couldn't they accept that her lumps, her voice, her drama, her messiness were all part of her truth? These weren't flaws to be ironed out, but the very essence of what made her real. Her parents didn't see it then, but LSP was shaping herself into something greater than the role they imagined. She wasn't meant to be a silent ruler standing politely at her side. She was meant to be a story, loud, uneven, unpredictable, and unforgettable. And in her own way, she sensed that. She may not have known exactly where her journey would take her, but she knew it couldn't remain confined to Lumpy Space. Among her friends, this growing restlessness often spilled into conversation. She would declare boldly that she didn't need the crown, that she could live on her own if she wanted to, that she could survive without anyone's help. Her friends would laugh, sometimes nervously, sometimes admiringly, unsure whether she meant it or not. But for LSP, these declarations were more than just dramatic outbursts. They were rehearsals for the life she longed to live. Looking back, we can see how these years formed the foundation of her story. They explain the strange mix of vulnerability and pride, loneliness and confidence that defines her. They show why she later chose exile, why she wandered into Ooh, why she clashed so fiercely with those around her, and yet craved their companionship all the same. Her life as a princess wasn't just a chapter of privilege, it was a crucible, a space where her identity was forged in the fires of expectation and rebellion. It's easy to laugh at her antics, her dramatic sighs, her endless declarations of frustration. But beneath the comedy lies something softer, something quietly profound. Her struggles remind us that even those born into palaces can feel trapped. Even those surrounded by privilege can feel unseen. Her lumps, imperfect and uneven, became a reflection of her spirit, full of rough edges, full of contradiction, but full of truth. Leaving Lumpy Space was not a single dramatic explosion, but rather a series of small steps that gradually pulled Lumpy Space Princess away from her royal life. Each argument with her parents, each restless night spent gazing beyond the misty borders of her home, added weight to her desire to leave. By the time she finally drifted away, it was less a sudden rebellion and more an inevitability, the next chapter in a story that had always been leading her outward. Her departure was messy, as so many things in LSP's life tend to be. She announced it with drama, making sure her parents and friends knew she was tired of being unappreciated, tired of living under rules that didn't understand her. She wanted freedom. She wanted independence. She wanted to live on her own terms. Those around her might have rolled their eyes, assuming she would come floating back after a night or two. But for LSP, this time was different. The call of independence was louder than the safety of home, and her lumps were pulling her towards something new. When she crossed the strange threshold that separates Lumpy Space from the land of Ooh, she carried little with her. No crown, no jewels, no entourage, just herself, dramatic, imperfect, endlessly expressive. And in that emptiness, in that lack of preparation, lay the essence of her independence. She wasn't stepping into the world as a princess. She was stepping into it as a person, trying to prove that she could survive without anyone else. The first days of her exile were not easy. The land of Ooh was beautiful but unpredictable, filled with rolling forests, glittering lakes, and curious creatures. Unlike the floating, purple landscape of her homeland, Ooh felt grounded, vibrant, and alive in ways that startled her. Yet it was also unfamiliar. The trees didn't part for her as palace servants once had. The people she met didn't bow or address her as princess. Out here, her title meant little. She had to make her way on personality alone. And so LSP tried to live as she thought an independent person should. She wandered into the forests, seeking food and shelter. She gathered sticks, attempted to light fires, and experimented with sleeping beneath the trees. These efforts often ended in frustration, with LSP groaning dramatically about the unfairness of the wilderness. But each failure carried a strange beauty because each failure also meant she was learning what it meant to exist without her parents' protection, without the comforts of royalty. There were nights when she lay on the forest floor looking up at the stars, her lumps pressed against the cool earth. Oh, in those moments, a quiet stillness would fall over her. She might complain about the bugs, about the uneven ground, about how her hair wasn't falling the way she liked. But deep down, she also felt something she hadn't felt in the palace, a sense of authenticity. This was her life, unshaped by anyone else's expectations. Messy, yes, but hers. Her independence also brought her face to face with the fragility of loneliness. Without her friends nearby, without the endless chatter of her peers, the silence of Ooh pressed heavily against her. She would call out into the night, sometimes scolding the darkness itself, sometimes confessing how much she missed the sound of other voices. These were tender moments, even if wrapped in her usual flair. Beneath all the dramatics, her exile revealed just how deeply she craved connection, even as she insisted she didn't need anyone. And yet, LSP's resilience shone through. Time and again, when she stumbled or struggled, she found a way to keep going. If she couldn't build a fire, she would huddle closer to the ground. If she couldn't find food, she would declare herself on a diet, as though it were her choice all along. If her loneliness grew heavy, she would spin stories aloud, imagining an audience that was laughing, swooning, or applauding her every word. These small acts of reframing weren't just survival. They were her unique way of turning hardship into narrative. of making her exile into something she could endure. It's easy to laugh at these moments, to see only the comedy in her bumbling attempts to live on her own. But when viewed softly, through the lens of bedtime reflection, they reveal something else. The courage of a soul trying, in her own uneven way, to carve out freedom. She didn't leave Lumpy Space because she had all the answers. She left because she believed deep down that she deserved the chance to find them. As the days in Ooh stretched into weeks, her exile became less of a temporary rebellion and more of a chosen path. She began to believe she could make it, that she could survive without anyone's help. Each dramatic groan, each complaint, each declaration of independence was a layer in the fragile armor she built around herself. And though cracks showed through, loneliness, hunger, uncertainty, they only made her story more real, more human, more lumpy. Because exile wasn't just about leaving home. For Lumpy Space, exile was about meeting herself, raw, flawed, and free for the very first time. A Lumpy Space. Princess's exile wasn't a quiet, solemn affair. It was loud, dramatic, and dripping with her signature flair. When she stormed out of Lumpy Space after clashing with her parents, she wasn't heading into the unknown with fear. Instead, she carried herself like a runaway star, announcing to the cosmos that she would be fine without her royal title, without her parents' rules, and without the suffocating responsibilities of being a princess. Her exile, in many ways, was self-imposed. It wasn't a banishment in the traditional sense. It was a declaration of freedom. LSP wanted independence, but she also wanted attention, and that strange balance would shape much of her journey. The first stage of her independence was marked by living in the wild. With no palace, no servants, and no comfort, she turned to survival in her own quirky, lumpy way. Many of you might remember the infamous moment when she decided to live in the woods, making a shelter out of whatever she could find. For most people, this would have been a terrifying ordeal, but for LSP, was another chance to show off her resilience and her unshakable confidence, even if she had no idea what she was doing. She foraged for food, fought with raccoons, and even declared herself queen of the forest, all while narrating her own life with the melodrama of someone who couldn't stop making everything feel like a grand story. But here's the thing about it. Her exile didn't just strip her of luxury, it stripped her of validation. She was no longer surrounded by people forced to respect her title, no longer adored by those who lived under her parents' rule. And without that constant audience, she often swung between bursts of confidence and deep moments of insecurity. It's one of the most fascinating contrasts in her character. She was loud, bold, and unafraid to call others out, but beneath the surface, she was terrified of being forgotten, of being unloved. Independence, in her case, was both a blessing and a curse. Her time away from Lumpy Space wasn't just about living rough. It was about redefining herself. LSP didn't just want to be a princess. She wanted to be someone who thrived on her own terms, someone who didn't need a crown to prove her worth. And this is where her independence started to take on a unique flavor. She wasn't looking for isolation in the way a hermit might. She wanted freedom, but she also craved connection. She wanted to be adored, to be seen as powerful, even while rejecting the structures that gave her those things back home. It was a paradox, one that constantly pushed her into new adventures and misadventures. During this time, she often clashed with the world around her. LSP had no filter, and her independence meant she was free to say whatever came to her mind. That sometimes put her at odds with Finn, Jake, and the others. She would barge into their lives, declare herself the center of attention, and then act as though her presence was a gift. And in a strange way, it often was. Even in her exile, LSP had a magnetic pull. She could irritate, frustrate, and confuse everyone around her. But she could also make them laugh, remind them not to take themselves too seriously, and bring a wild sort of energy that broke the monotony of life. Her exile also shaped her relationship with herself. Away from the expectations of royalty, she leaned into the idea of self-expression, whether it was through her diary entries, where she poured out her feelings with brutal honesty, or through the sheer dramatics of her speech. LSP became a character defined by her ability to narrate her own existence. She wasn't just living her life, she was performing it, constantly turning her experiences into moments of theater, even when no one was around to watch. This trait made her exile less lonely because, in her eyes, she was never truly alone. She always had herself as an audience. But independence wasn't easy. Hunger, discomfort, and fear often caught up with her, though she would rarely admit it outright. Instead, she cloaked her struggles in humor, in sass, in the grandiosity of her storytelling. She would say things like, "Whatever, I don't need food, I'm so over it," when in reality she was starving. Or she would declare that she was thriving in the wild, even as she shivered in the cold. Her exile revealed not only her strength, but also her vulnerability. She was surviving, yes, but she was also performing survival, trying to prove to the world and to herself that she didn't need anyone else to define her. In many ways, this period of exile mirrored something universal: the messy, awkward, and often contradictory path toward independence. Many of us know the feeling of wanting to be free, but also craving the security of connection. LSP embodied that duality in every lumpy, dramatic action she took. And while she sometimes stumbled, sometimes exaggerated, and sometimes outright failed, she never lost that spark of determination that made her such a fascinating character to watch. Lumpy Space, Princess's independence, wasn't just about roughing it in the woods. It was about exploring who she was when no one was telling her what to do. She took on the wilderness like it was a stage play, throwing herself into it with equal parts defiance and cluelessness. There were times when she really did thrive out there, learning to cook strange concoctions over makeshift fires, fashioning odd little shelters, and bossing around woodland creatures as though they were her loyal subjects. And then there were times when her survival skills were less about practicality and more about sheer willpower. She wasn't the kind of character who studied the land, planned ahead, or learned from mistakes. Instead, she treated every failure as another chance to declare herself stronger than ever. That kind of attitude could be frustrating, but it was also inspiring. LSP's exile wasn't just an escape from Lumpy Space. It was a rejection of tradition. She refused to be just another princess in a long line of rulers. She wanted something different, even if she didn't always know what that different was. It's why she could stumble through the woods one moment and then proclaim herself a free spirit the next. The mixture of vulnerability and bravado is what made her exile feel so raw and relatable. Independence gave her a chance to meet the world on her own terms. She started crossing paths with characters beyond her usual circle, showing up in places she never would have gone if she had stayed at home. Sometimes this meant inserting herself into Finn and Jake's adventures, often complicating things in her dramatic way. Other times it meant testing her charm and wits against complete strangers, trying to prove she could hold her own. She didn't always succeed. Sometimes she made enemies, sometimes she got laughed at, but she always came back swinging, never willing to admit defeat. Her time in exile also exposed her complicated relationship with pride. LSP hated asking for help even when she needed it desperately. She would rather starve or stumble through a disaster than admit weakness. And yet, when she did finally break down and confess her struggles, those moments carried a surprising weight. Beneath the sarcasm, beneath the exaggerated, oh, whatever attitude, there was a lumpy girl who wanted someone to care, someone to notice that she was still out there trying. The tug-of-war between independence and the need for affection is one of the deepest threads in her story. One of the most fascinating aspects of this chapter in her life is how she managed to redefine royalty for herself. LSP wasn't sitting on a throne anymore, but she still saw herself as a princess. Only now her kingdom was the forest, or a campfire, or even just a patch of dirt where she happened to be sitting. Her royal declarations weren't backed by power or armies. They were backed by sheer confidence. And oddly enough, that confidence was enough to carry her through. She may not have had subjects, but she had presence. Wherever she went, people remembered her. That for LSP was enough to keep her going. It's also worth noting how her exile brought out her creativity. She was always narrating her life, yes, but in the woods, that habit grew even stronger. She filled her diary with wild stories, often embellishing the truth, turning mundane events into epic tales of survival and adventure. Losing her comforts didn't make her quiet. It made her louder, more imaginative, more determined to be remembered. In a way, her diary became her new palace, a place where she ruled completely over her story. Every word she wrote was another way of proving she was more than just her lumps, more than just a princess who walked away. Her independence also deepened her contradiction. On one hand, she claimed she didn't need anyone. On the other hand, she constantly put herself in situations where she would run into Finn, Jake, or others who would inevitably end up helping her. It was almost as if she wanted to prove she could do it alone, but secretly hoped someone would be there to catch her if she fell. This tension gave her exile a bittersweet quality. It wasn't just a tale of freedom. It was a tale of longing, too. Another detail that often goes unnoticed is how LSP used humor as armor. Out in the wild, she could have easily been overwhelmed by fear, hunger, or loneliness. But instead, she turned those feelings into jokes, into sassy remarks, into over-the-top speeches about how amazing she was. That humor didn't erase her struggle, but it softened. It gave her a way to survive, not just physically, but emotionally. And for many fans, that trait made her feel oddly human, even in all her lumpiness. Her exile wasn't a straight path. There were setbacks, moments of near collapse, and times when she questioned whether she had made the right choice. But the important thing is that she didn't give up. Even when she stumbled, she kept moving forward. And in doing so, she created a version of independence that was messy, imperfect, but completely her own. In the end, Lumpy Space Princess's exile wasn't just about running away. It was about carving out an identity. It was about proving to herself that she could exist beyond the expectations of her family, beyond the walls of her home, and beyond the idea of what a princess was supposed to be. And though her journey was filled with mistakes, those mistakes were also lessons. They were proof that independence isn't about perfection. It's about resilience. As the days of her exile stretched into weeks, and those weeks turned into months, the wilderness became less of a novelty and more of a mirror. Every crackling fire she built, every night she spent under the canopy of trees, reflected back the choices she had made. Lumpy Space Princess wasn't just surviving. She was confronting herself piece by lumpy piece. There's something quietly poetic about the way she wandered the forests and meadows of Ooh. She wasn't polished like Princess Bubblegum, nor was she as effortlessly mystical as Marceline. LSP's journey was messy, unfiltered, and honest. She stumbled. She shouted at the sky. She cried when no one was around and then laughed at her own tears. In her unrefined independence, she revealed the truth of what it means to step away from comfort and face the world with nothing but your stubborn will. The wilderness taught her humility, though she would never admit it out loud. Food wasn't always easy to find, and not every animal she bossed around obeyed her command. Nights grew cold, and loneliness was heavier than hunger. Yet even in those low moments, she clung to her pride. She framed every hardship as an epic story, an adventure that proved she was stronger than anyone gave her credit for. And perhaps, in her own way, she was right. Few princesses would ever dare abandon their crowns to live so wildly. Few would choose hardship over comfort. Her independence also allowed her to test boundaries with the world around her. When she drifted into towns or camps, she made her presence felt instantly. She would demand attention, boast about her accomplishments, and then storm away in a huff if she felt slighted. These encounters were chaotic, but they built her reputation. Lumpy Space Princess became more than just a runaway royal. She became a figure who roamed the land, unpredictable and unforgettable. It's here that we see one of the deeper truths of LSP's character. Exile didn't shrink her spirit. It amplified. Freed from the weight of her parents' expectations, freed from the narrow custom of her lumpy homeland, she became even more herself. Bold, dramatic, and unafraid to take up space. For some, this made her insufferable. For others, it made her magnetic. But either way, she was no longer hidden. What's remarkable is how her independence carried a strange kind of dignity. Yes, she bumbled through the woods, often living on scraps and stubbornness. Yes, she sometimes exaggerated her triumphs or twisted events to make herself look grander than she was. But at the heart of it, she was carving out a life on her own terms. That is no small thing. Many of us, in quieter ways, long to do the same, to step outside of what's expected, and discover who we are when no one else is telling us how to be. In certain moments, her exile even revealed glimmers of wisdom. Her diary, full of dramatics and wild embellishment, sometimes slipped into raw honesty. She would write about missing her parents even though she claimed to hate them. She would admit to feeling jealous or lonely when she saw Finn and Jake walking together. These confessions showed a side of her that the world rarely got to see, a softness hidden beneath the bravado. And that softness is what makes her story so deeply human, even wrapped in lumps and sass. The theme of imperfection became central to her independence. Lumpy Space Princess didn't need to be smooth, elegant, or graceful to matter. She was proof that rough edges, flaws, and contradictions could still create something meaningful. In many ways, her lumps themselves were a symbol of resilience. They marked her as different, yes, but also as strong. Every time she stumbled and got back up, every time she declared herself fabulous in the face of failure, those lumps seemed less like flaws and more like badges of honor. Her exile also added to the larger tapestry of Adventure Time's world. It echoed the series' recurring theme that home is not always where we are born, but where we choose to be. For LSP, the forests and fields became her new palace, a kingdom she ruled with nothing but her voice and her will. And though she often longed for companionship, she also reveled in the freedom of it. She had walked away from the predictability of Lumpy Space, and in doing so, she discovered a version of herself that was raw, unfiltered, and completely unique. And so, Lumpy Space Princess's exile wasn't just a chapter in her life, it was a transformation. She went from being a princess defined by her parents' rules to a figure defined by her own chaotic independence. Her time alone in the wilderness didn't smooth out her lump. It celebrated. It made her louder, stronger, and more sure of herself, even if she still wavered in moments of quiet. By the end of her exile, one thing was clear. Lumpy Space Princess didn't need a throne to be royalty. She didn't need perfect manners or polished speeches. Her kingdom was wherever she chose to stand, and her crown was her unshakable sense of self. That kind of independence may not look graceful, but it is powerful. And in that messy, lumpy way, she carved out a story that was entirely her own. Relationships have always been at the heart of Lumpy Space Princess's story. For all her declarations of independence, for all her dramatic speeches about not needing anyone, she has always been deeply shaped by the people around her, whether it's in friendship, rivalry, or fleeting romance. LSP's connections reveal as much about her as her solitude in the wilderness ever did. In fact, if her exile was about finding herself alone, then her relationships were about testing who she was in the eyes of others. One of the most important dynamics she had was with Finn and Jake. These two adventurers became unlikely constants in her life. Lumpy Space Princess often burst into their stories like a sudden storm, loud, unpredictable, and impossible to ignore. At times, she drove them to the edge of patience with her self-centered antics, demanding attention, starting argument, or dragging them into situations that made little sense. And yet, beneath all of that, there was a strange kind of affection. Finn and Jake didn't always understand her, but they tolerated her, and sometimes even protected her. For LSP, that tolerance meant more than she let on. Think of the way she tried to prove herself to them, inserting herself into their adventures as though she were part of the team. Her antics might have gotten in the way, but there was always a kernel of sincerity buried in the drama. She wanted to belong. She wanted Finn and Jake to see her as someone capable, maybe even as a friend. It's why her failures around them hurt so much, and why she bounced back with even louder confidence the next time. Their bond was complicated, but it anchored her. It gave her a chance to step outside of her own story and glimpse the possibility of being part of something bigger. Her relationship with Princess Bubblegum was different, more of a clash of opposites. Bubblegum was composed, scientific, and endlessly patient, while LSP was chaotic, emotional, and impatient. And yet, there was a spark between them, not of romance, but of tension, that carried its own kind of intimacy. LSP often positioned herself as Bubblegum's rival, whether real or imagined, poking fun at her seriousness or trying to outshine her in small ways. But beneath the posturing, there was also respect. LSP might have mocked Bubblegum, but she also admired her composure and strength. And perhaps, in moments she would never admit, she even envied the way Bubblegum seemed so sure of herself. Marceline, too, played a subtle role in LSP's life. Their friendship was casual, often built on shared moments of music, late-night adventures, or simply hanging around. Marceline's cool detachment balanced against LSP's high energy in a way that made their interactions memorable. Where Bubblegum represented everything LSP wasn't, disciplined, intelligent, refined, Marceline represented what LSP could almost be: independent, carefree, yet still undeniably powerful. In Marceline, LSP might have seen a version of herself that worked, a personality just as rebellious but less destructive. Spending time with her was both comforting and a little intimidating. But perhaps the most telling part of LSP's relationships came from her search for love. Again and again, she threw herself into awkward romance, convinced that each time would be the one that finally proved her worth. Whether it was a fleeting crush, a bold declaration, or an ill-fated date, her attempts at romance usually ended in misunderstanding. Sometimes she came on too strong. Sometimes she misread the situation. And often she pushed people away with the very behaviors that had drawn them in at first. These stories might have been played for comedy in the series, but beneath the laughs was something tender. LSP's quest for love revealed just how deeply she longed for acceptance, for someone to see her lumps and her flaws and care for her anyway. It's easy to focus only on the conflicts she caused in these relationships, the shouting matches, the jealous fits, the dramatic exit. But if you look closely, you see that those conflicts were rooted in fear. Fear of being rejected, fear of being left behind, fear of not being enough. Lumpy Space, Princess, hid those fears beneath a thick layer of sass and bravado, but her relationships kept pulling them to the surface. Each connection, whether it ended in laughter or tears, became another mirror reflecting her hidden vulnerability. And so, while LSP often declared herself too fabulous to care, the truth is that she cared deeply. She cared about being loved, about being seen, about mattering to someone. Her friendships and romances might not have been perfect, but they were real. They revealed the heart beneath the lumps, the soft truths behind the drama. And in that way, her relationships became some of the most revealing parts of her story. When we step back and look at the broader shape of Lumpy Space Princess's relationships, what stands out most is the constant back and forth between connection and distance. She pulled people in with her loud charisma, then pushed them away with her temper or her pride. It was a cycle that repeated again and again. And yet each cycle left a trace behind, a small bond that never fully disappeared. This is why Finn, Jake, Marceline, and even Princess Bubblegum would continue to interact with her long after most others would have given up. There was something magnetic about her, something that kept people from cutting her off completely, no matter how many times she stormed away. Her friendships with Finn and Jake often highlighted this pattern. Finn, with his endless optimism and compassion, seemed to see through her drama at times. He would roll his eyes at her antics, but he never stopped offering her a place beside him. Jake, more laid back, often treated her like an unpredictable storm he simply had to weather. He didn't take her too seriously, but he also didn't abandon her. Between the two of them, they provided the kind of gentle consistency that LSP desperately needed but rarely acknowledged. And when she felt included in their world, even briefly, she seemed calmer, almost as if the edge of her loneliness softened. Her rivalry-tinged connection with Bubblegum revealed another layer of her personality. LSP often mocked Bubblegum for being uptight or overly serious, but in truth, this criticism came from her own insecurities. Bubblegum embodied control and grace, two things LSP often lacked. By poking fun, she leveled the playing field, turning admiration into something safer, something she could handle. Yet when Bubblegum extended kindness toward her, it sometimes left LSP speechless, caught off guard by the very care she had been craving all along. With Marceline, the dynamic was gentler, though no less complex. Marceline's laid-back confidence offered LSP a safe space to let her guard down. There was less pressure, less need for rivalry. Marceline didn't compete with her, nor did she try to correct her behavior. Instead, she let LSP be herself, lumps and all. These quieter moments between them, singing songs, lounging together, or just sharing the same space, showed a softer side of LSP that rarely emerged elsewhere. It was a reminder that beneath her chaotic exterior, she longed for companionship that didn't demand perfection or control. But it's in her pursuit of romance where Lumpy Space Princess's vulnerabilities shine brightest. Love for her was not just about affection. It was proof. Proof that she was desirable. Proof that she was worthy. Proof that her lumps didn't make her less. So when her romantic endeavors fell apart, and they often did, the rejection cut deep. She masked the pain with loud declarations of independence, claiming she didn't care or that she had moved on to someone better. Yet the repetition of the pattern revealed the truth. She cared immensely, and each heartbreak chipped away at the confidence she tried so hard to project. It's worth noting that her romantic failures were not always the fault of others. LSP's dramatic nature often sabotaged her chances. She could be demanding, possessive, or quick to anger. Her expectations of romance were sometimes unrealistic, drawn from the exaggerated stories she told us in her diary. But rather than condemning her for this, the show treated it with a kind of bittersweet humor. The audience could laugh at her over-the-top antics while still recognizing the humanity in her struggle. After all, who hasn't made mistakes in love? Who hasn't felt the sting of wanting too much too soon, or pushing someone away without meaning to? What ties all of these relationships together, friends, rivals, and loves, is the idea that Lumpy Space Princess was searching for something she could never quite name. She wanted to be admired, yes, but more than that, she wanted to be known, to be seen as more than just lumps and sass, more than just the princess who stormed off into exile. Every interaction, every dramatic speech, every tearful outburst was, in some way, a plea for recognition. And while she often complicated her own path, there was a sincerity to her efforts that made her relatable. She didn't hide her flaws behind perfection. She lived them out loud for everyone to see. Her relationships reflected that same rawness, full of fights and reconciliations, heartbreaks, and unlikely bonds. It wasn't neat, but it was real. And in a world as strange and magical as Ooh, that kind of messy honesty is a story all its own. But Finn's friendships were never simple, and that complexity gave them depth. Consider his bond with Flame Princess. Their relationship began with sparks, both literally and figuratively. She was passionate, powerful, and volatile, while Finn was driven by compassion and a youthful curiosity. Their connection was exciting, but it was also fraught with misunderstanding. Finn's decision to spy on Flame Princess by writing in his journal became one of the most defining moments of his early romantic life. It highlighted his immaturity at the time, showing that even the purest heart can stumble when trying to navigate feelings and trust. Their relationship eventually ended, but not without leaving both of them changed. For Finn, it was another lesson in love, one that required him to confront his own mistakes, acknowledge his flaws, and accept that some connections, no matter how intense, are not meant to last. What's striking about Finn's relationships is how they mirror the stages of growing up. As a child, friendships often feel absolute, forever, and unshakable. But as we grow, life teaches us that not every bond will stand the test of time. Adventure Time captures this bittersweet truth through Finn's evolving connection. He had to learn to let go, sometimes with pain, sometimes with relief, but always with growth. One of the most powerful dynamics in Finn's life was his long, complicated connection with Princess Bubblegum. From the very start, Finn admired her with the kind of intensity that only a young heart can muster. He saw her brilliance, her beauty, her leadership, and wanted nothing more than to be by her side. Yet Bubblegum, centuries older and carrying the weight of responsibility for her people, could not reciprocate Finn's feelings in the same way. This tension shaped much of Finn's early adolescence. His longing for Bubblegum wasn't just a crush. It was his first lesson in the painful reality that love doesn't always align with our desires. What makes their relationship remarkable, however, is how it evolved. Bubblegum cared for Finn deeply, but she was also often distant, prioritizing her duties as the ruler of the Candy Kingdom. At times, she treated Finn as a child, and at others, she relied on him as if he were her equal. This push and pull mirrored Finn's own journey of maturity. He wanted to be seen as more than just a kid, and through his bond with Bubblegum, he slowly earned that recognition. While they never became romantic partners, their friendship matured into something stronger, a relationship built on mutual respect, loyalty, and genuine care. Yet relationships aren't only about affection and love. They also come with conflict. Finn often clashed with those he cared about most. With Jake, disagreements occasionally flared when their differing perspectives came into play. Jake's easygoing attitude sometimes frustrated Finn, especially when Finn needed urgency or seriousness. But these conflicts never broke them. Instead, they strengthened the foundation of their bond, showing that true friendship isn't about never fighting. It's about enduring those fights and emerging closer. There were also moments when Finn's relationships with others revealed his vulnerability. Take his interactions with his human father, Martin. Their bond was fractured from the start. Martin's selfishness and neglect contrasted harshly with Finn's ideals of love and loyalty. Their dynamic wasn't just painful, it was transformative. Finn had to learn that family ties don't automatically guarantee love or support. This realization forced him to forge his own identity, separate from the shadow of a disappointing parent. It's in these broken connections that Finn discovered resilience, learning that he could still build meaningful relationships even if his family foundation was weak. Even his relationship with Marceline offered lessons in balance. Marceline, with her centuries of life and layers of pain, often clashed with Finn's youthful optimism. But their friendship brought them both something vital. For Marceline, Finn's sincerity was a reminder of hope and innocence in a world she had long gone weary of. For Finn, Marceline's honesty and emotional depth pushed him to see beyond surface-level fun and into the complexities of human or vampire emotion. Their shared adventures, from music sessions to monster fighting, gave Finn another kind of friendship. One that wasn't about constant closeness, but about trust, acceptance, and the knowledge that someone would always be there when it truly mattered. Through these connections, romantic, platonic, and familial, Finn experienced the full spectrum of human emotion. He felt joy, heartbreak, betrayal, forgiveness, and everything in between. Each bond shaped him, challenged him, and pushed him to grow. Adventure Time never presented relationships as simple or permanent. Instead, it showed them as fluid, evolving, sometimes painful, and always meaningful. Finn's story reminds us that relationships are never static. They change, they evolve, they end, and sometimes they begin again in new form. One of the most touching arcs in the series is how Finn's friendships taught him the importance of acceptance. He had to accept that Princess Bubblegum's heart belonged elsewhere, that Flame Princess needed to find her own path, and that his father would never be the parent he wanted. Acceptance, though painful, became the foundation of his growth. Adventure Time also highlighted how conflicts within relationships can serve as catalysts for a deeper understanding. When Finn and Jake fought, it was often because Finn wanted to push forward into something bigger, while Jake preferred the comfort of the moment. But each disagreement taught Finn about patience, compromise, and perspective. Similarly, his conflicts with Bubblegum revealed the tension between personal desire and duty, a theme that echoes throughout the series. Relationships aren't only about harmony. They're about learning to navigate storms without losing sight of the bond beneath. What makes Finn's relationships so relatable is how they mirror our own journeys. Who hasn't experienced the sting of unrequited love, the ache of a friendship fading, or the disappointment of a family member who let us down? Finn's experiences remind us that these moments, though painful, are not the end. Instead, they are stepping stones that guide us toward maturity, resilience, and a deeper appreciation of the bonds that do endure. Even when relationships fractured, Finn's capacity for forgiveness stood out. His ability to forgive wasn't about ignoring wrongs, it was about choosing growth over bitterness. With his father, Martin, Finn never received the closure he wanted, yet he learned to move forward without letting that wound define him. With Bubblegum, he let go of the idea of romantic love and embraced the value of their enduring friendship. Forgiveness, in Finn's journey, became less about the other person and more about freeing himself to continue growing. The conflicts Finn faced also revealed his own flaws, which is what made his character so human. He wasn't always the perfect friend or partner. Sometimes he acted selfishly, other times he failed to respect boundaries, and occasionally his determination led him to reckless decisions. But each failure became a lesson. Adventure Time never shied away from showing Finn's mistakes, because in truth, mistakes are often the most honest part of relationships. Through them, Finn, and by extension, the audience, learned how to take responsibility, how to apologize, and how to rebuild trust. And then there were the quiet moments of connection, the kind that didn't involve conflict or drama. Sitting around a campfire with Jake, singing with Marceline, or simply watching the stars reminded Finn that relationships aren't only about the highs and lows. They're also about the steady presence of companionship. These small moments carry just as much weight as the grand adventure, grounding Finn and reminding him of the beauty in simply being together. By the end of Adventure Time, Finn's understanding of relationships had matured profoundly. He no longer chased idealized versions of love or friendship. Instead, he valued honesty, acceptance, and the willingness to grow alongside others. His journey wasn't about finding the perfect bond. It was about realizing that imperfection is what makes relationships real. The misunderstandings, the heartbreaks, the reconciliation, all of it painted a fuller, richer picture of what it means to truly connect with others. Ultimately, Finn's relationships taught him, and us, that love in all its forms is both fragile and resilient. It can break under pressure, yet it can also heal and transform. Friendships can drift apart, but they can also return stronger than before. Conflicts can divide, but they can also deepen understanding. Finn's story doesn't present relationships as fairy tales. It presents them as life itself, messy, unpredictable, and deeply meaningful. As Finn grew, his world expanded, and so did his capacity for love and connection. He didn't end his journey with one perfect relationship neatly tied up in a bow. Instead, he carried with him a tapestry of bonds, some thriving, some broken, but all significant. That tapestry is what made him who he was, a hero not just because he fought monsters or saved kingdoms, but because he learned how to love, how to forgive, and how to keep moving forward even when relationships didn't turn out the way he hoped. In the end, Adventure Time reminds us through Finn's journey that relationships aren't about permanence or perfection. They're about presence, growth, and the willingness to face both joy and pain with an open heart. Every friendship, every conflict, every heartbreak leaves its mark, and together, those marks form the story of who we are. For Finn, that story was one of resilience, compassion, and the courage to keep connecting, no matter how many times he stumbled along the way. As we drift deeper into the story of Lumpy Space Princess, we come to one of the most fascinating aspects of her journey, the way she grows, changes, and reveals hidden parts of herself that are often overlooked. At first glance, LSP might seem shallow or even self-absorbed. Her dramatic voice, her constant complaints, and her flair for exaggeration all paint her as a comedic character. But like many figures in the land of Ooh, her surface personality hides a much richer tapestry underneath. Tonight, let's gently explore the layers of transformation, growth, and quiet truth that make LSP so much more than she appears. When we think about transformation, it's important to remember that Lumpy Space Princess begins her story as an archetype of teenage rebellion. She rejects her parents' rule, she leaves her royal home, and she constantly insists that she knows better than anyone else. Many of her early actions, running away, camping out in the woods, latching onto Finn and Jake, come from a desire to assert her independence. In those moments, her character seems almost stuck in a loop of immaturity, constantly clashing with others while refusing to reflect on her own behavior. But this phase of her life is necessary because it sets the foundation for the growth that follows. What's remarkable about LSP is that even in her most childish or dramatic states, there are glimpses of vulnerability. She lashes out because she feels unheard. She exaggerates because she wants to be noticed. Her constant need to prove herself isn't only arrogance, it's also insecurity. We begin to see that behind the royal drama lies a being who desperately wants to belong, but who struggles to find her place outside the identity of princess. These cracks in her facade are the first hints of the deeper transformation waiting quietly in her story. LSP's growth is not straightforward. She doesn't suddenly become wise, kind, or humble. Instead, her evolution happens in fits and starts, often hidden behind her loud complaints or rash decisions. One of the key ways we see this growth is through her shifting relationship. She pushes people away, but later longs for connection. She mocks the world around her, yet secretly craves its approval. And though she pretends not to care, her actions often betray a heart that is more tender than she admits. It's in these contradictions that her hidden depths reveal themselves most clearly. A particularly moving example of her hidden depth is her relationship with her parents. Though she rebels against them fiercely, deep down she longs for their recognition. She wants them to see her not as a child, but as someone capable of surviving on her own terms. This longing reflects something universal, our desire to be acknowledged as we grow, even when that growth comes with mistakes and rebellion. LSP's conflicts with her family, though played for humor, mirror the real struggles of independence that many people face. Her transformation also becomes clear when we notice how her role shifts in the larger story of Ooh. In the early seasons, she is almost always the comedic side character, the loud, lumpy princess who stirs up trouble. But as the series continues, her importance grows. She becomes tied to cosmic events, to deeper histories, and even to the fate of Ooh itself. This shift shows that what may appear silly or shallow on the surface can hold unexpected significance. LSP embodies the idea that there is hidden power in the overlooked, and that sometimes the most underestimated figures carry the most profound roles. Another part of her growth lies in how she learns, slowly, to confront loneliness. Many of LSP's antics are driven by a fear of being alone, whether it's her dramatic attempts to insert herself into Finn and Jake's adventures, or her habit of declaring herself superior while secretly aching for companionship. Loneliness becomes both her weakness and her teacher. Through it, she begins to recognize that independence doesn't have to mean isolation, and that true strength often comes from balancing self-reliance with the courage to connect with others. Even her dramatic way of speaking, once only a source of comedy, becomes a kind of shield. Beneath her exaggerated tones is a vulnerability that words alone cannot mask. Her voice, with its constant shifts between superiority and despair, tells the story of someone who wants desperately to matter. The more we listen, the more we realize that her drama is a performance designed to hide her insecurities. But it also reveals a passionate, deeply feeling soul. As LSP grows, we also see hints of leadership. Though she rejects the expectations of being a princess, she still carries within her the instincts of one. In moments of crisis, she can be decisive, even brave. Her ability to take charge, though often messy, shows that she has more potential for responsibility than she allows herself to believe. These glimpses suggest that her journey is not about rejecting her identity entirely, but about reshaping it into something authentic and true to herself. Transformation for LSP is not about becoming someone else. It's about uncovering the depths of who she already is. The layers of drama, rebellion, and insecurity peel back slowly to reveal strength, vulnerability, and even wisdom. Her path reminds us that growth rarely looks perfect. It's often loud, clumsy, and filled with mistakes. But within that mess lies the heart of transformation, the quiet emergence of truths that were always there, waiting to be seen. One of the subtler aspects of Lumpy Space Princess's growth is how she learns to navigate emotional intelligence, though in her own unconventional style. She may not always express empathy in a textbook way, and her social missteps are frequent, but she begins to notice the feelings of others in quiet moments. Perhaps it's a hesitation before she lashes out at Finn, or a brief pause before she storms away from bubblegum, or even the rare moment of genuine concern for Marceline. These small gestures reveal that beneath the brash exterior, LSP is learning to temper her impulses and consider the perspectives of those around her. Her growth isn't linear. It ebbs and flows with her mood, her experience, and her environment, but the trajectory is unmistakable. She is slowly becoming more attuned to the world she inhabits. A striking example of hidden depth is found in her handling of responsibility. Early on, LSP often shirked any duty that required consistency or care. She avoided chores, tasks, and obligations in favor of drama and spectacle. Yet as the series progresses, she demonstrates moments of unexpected responsibility. When situations demand action, she can surprise both herself and those around her with her resourcefulness. Whether it's helping solve a problem in a chaotic scenario or stepping up to protect someone weaker, LSP's growth is quietly monumental. These moments are rarely glorified or celebrated, but they carry immense significance. They reveal that beneath the lumps and theatrics is someone capable of real courage and adaptability. Her transformation also reflects a deeper understanding of identity. LSP begins to reconcile the tension between who she wants to be and who she actually is. She realizes that her lumps, her drama, and even her flaws are not liabilities. They are intrinsic parts of her essence. Accepting herself as she is allows her to approach the world with more confidence and authenticity. She becomes less concerned with performing for approval and more invested in acting in alignment with her own value. This self-awareness is a milestone in her growth, demonstrating that personal evolution often begins with embracing our imperfections rather than trying to erase them. In tandem with self-acceptance, LSP's emotional resilience grows significantly. She experiences disappointment, rejection, and conflict repeatedly. Yet each experience teaches her something new. She begins to develop patience, albeit unevenly, and learns to respond rather than react impulsively. Her sense of humor, once merely a defensive mechanism, evolves into a tool for connection. By sharing her experiences through exaggerated storytelling or dramatic narrative, she creates bonds with others, even if those bonds are unconventional. Lumpy Space Princess begins to understand that resilience isn't about never being hurt. It's about continuing to engage with life despite pain. Growth also manifests in how LSP views her social standing. She moves from seeking validation externally through attention, admiration, or romantic pursuit to cultivating a sense of self-worth internally. While she still enjoys theatrics and praise, there are moments when she acts with integrity independent of recognition. This shift is subtle, often hidden behind humor and drama, but it represents a profound evolution. Lumpy Space Princess is learning that her value isn't dictated by others' approval. It exists inherently in her choices and her persistence. Another dimension of her hidden depths is her capacity for reflection. Though she rarely engages in introspection in the early episodes, later storylines reveal a thoughtful side that contemplates the consequences of her actions. She begins to understand that words have weight, that decisions can ripple through the lives of others, and that her identity as a princess carries both privilege and responsibility. Reflection for LSP doesn't always come with eloquence. It often arrives in chaotic bursts, in confession, or in diary entry. But its presence indicates a growing self-awareness that enriches her character. Finally, Lumpy Space Princess's transformation is mirrored in her connection to the world around her. The forests, the towns, the friends she encounters, all these spaces become part of her journey toward growth. She learns that relationships, challenges, and even solitude are tools for understanding herself more deeply. By embracing the full spectrum of experience, joy and sorrow, triumph and failure, she gradually uncovers the layers of her hidden potential. Her transformation is not a destination, it is a continuous unfolding, a gentle revelation of the strengths, vulnerabilities, and wisdom she always carried within. As Lumpy Space Princess continues to evolve, one of the most fascinating elements is how her hidden depths intersect with her sense of heroism. Adventure Time never presents heroism as a single act of bravery or a clean, flawless victory. Instead, heroism is woven into daily choices, into the ways characters respond to challenges, and into the courage required to embrace oneself fully. For LSP, heroism often appears quietly, between the drama and the theatric. She steps up in moments that matter, not for applause, but because it aligns with who she is becoming, a being willing to act with conviction, even when it's difficult. Her bravery is not always traditional. She doesn't always charge into battle with swords drawn or make grand speeches to rally armies. Often her heroism is emotional, relational, or moral. When she chooses to support a friend despite personal risks, when she admits she was wrong, or when she offers care in her own lumpy, chaotic way, she demonstrates courage. It is the kind of heroism that is quiet, understated, and deeply human. It reminds us that sometimes the most profound acts of bravery are not the ones sung about in stories, but the ones lived quietly and consistently. Hidden depths also reveal themselves through her ability to adapt. Lumpy Space, Princess, has faced countless challenges, from the unpredictable creatures of Ooh to the consequences of her own impulsive decisions. She has wandered alone, clashed with royalty, and navigated heartbreak. Each of these experiences has honed her instinct, sharpened her intuition, and deepened her understanding of the world. LSP is learning to read situations, to anticipate outcomes, and to choose actions that reflect a growing wisdom. Her adaptation is not perfect, and she still stumbles often, but the pattern of learning and adjusting is unmistakable. One of the most poignant aspects of her growth is how she negotiates her identity within the context of her lumpy nature. Lumpy Space, Princess does not become smoother, quieter, or less dramatic. Her lumps remain, her voice remains boisterous, and her flair for dramatics remains central to her identity. Yet she learns to integrate these traits with maturity, understanding when to amplify them and when to temper them. She begins to see her eccentricities not as obstacles to acceptance, but as defining qualities that give her power and authenticity. This synthesis of self-acceptance and growth is one of the most profound elements of her transformation. LSP's evolution also extends to her understanding of morality and consequence. Early in her story, she often acts impulsively, considering only immediate desires or personal satisfaction. Over time, however, she begins to weigh the impact of her actions on others. She notices when her words wound friends, when her antics disrupt community, or when her pride causes unintended harm. While she may still misstep, there is a growing awareness that choices have ripple effects. This awareness marks a subtle yet crucial layer of her hidden depth, a recognition that living authentically involves responsibility, empathy, and reflection. A particularly revealing aspect of her transformation comes in her moments of solitude. When LSP is alone, away from the noise of her own drama and the demands of others, she often reflects quietly. In these interludes, she confronts her fears, her regrets, and her desire. She questions her decision, considers her relationships, and even dreams of the person she might become. These moments are rarely loud or performative, but they are deeply significant. They show that transformation is not always visible to others. The growth often happens in private, where no applause is possible, and where the only audience is oneself. Through all of this, Lumpy Space, Princess demonstrates that growth is nonlinear. She still has setbacks, fits of anger, and lapses in judgment. Yet the accumulation of small insights, quiet realizations, and incremental changes reveals a trajectory towards self-understanding and resilience. Her story teaches that transformation is rarely about perfection. It is about persistent effort, reflection, and the courage to embrace one's true nature, lumps and all. By the end of this segment, it becomes clear that LSP's hidden depths are not hidden because they are inaccessible. They are hidden because the world often overlooks the quieter, subtler forms of strength. She embodies a kind of layered heroism, one that combines humor, vulnerability, perseverance, and self-awareness. Her journey encourages us to look beyond appearances, to value emotional courage as much as physical bravery, and to appreciate the complex beauty in beings who are loud, messy, and imperfect. Ultimately, Lumpy Space, Princess's story of transformation, is a story of discovery. Discovery of her power, her resilience, her capacity for love and care, and her ability to navigate a world that is as unpredictable and extraordinary as she is. It is a gentle reminder that true growth is ongoing, multifaceted, and often quietly profound. And in embracing her own complexity, she teaches us that being fully oneself with all one's lumps and edges is an achievement of remarkable depth and beauty. As we reach the final chapter of tonight's tale, let's settle in and explore the lasting impact of Lumpy Space Princess on the land of Ooh and beyond. Every being leaves an imprint on the world, some in grand, sweeping gesture, and others in quiet, subtle ways that ripple far beyond immediate notice. Lumpy Space Princess, with all her drama, flair, and lumps, belongs to both categories. Her legacy is not only in the adventures she undertook or the friendships she shaped, but in the ways her very existence challenged perceptions, reshaped relationships, and inspired change. From the moment she first bounded onto the screen, LSP was a character of contradiction. She was loud yet sensitive, self-centered yet capable of deep empathy, chaotic yet surprisingly insightful. These contradictions made her memorable, yes, but they also made her influential. She taught the other characters and the audience that a presence does not need to conform to traditional ideals to matter, that heroism and importance can emerge from unexpected places, and that one's quirks, far from being flaws, can be sources of identity and power. Her influence is perhaps most visible in the way she touched the lives of her closest companions. Finn and Jake, for instance, experienced firsthand the unpredictability of her personality. Their interactions with LSP were often humorous, sometimes exasperating, and occasionally profoundly moving. Yet each encounter shaped them. Finn learned patience, understanding, and the nuanced dynamics of friendship and conflict. Jake, with his more relaxed approach to life, gained a deeper appreciation for the layers beneath the surface of those around him. In both cases, Lumpy Space Princess acted as a catalyst, sparking growth and reflection that extended far beyond her own narrative. LSP's legacy also resonates through her more public impact. Within Ooh, she embodied a challenge to conventional royalty, and she was a princess who did not adhere to protocol, who questioned authority, and who carved her own path. This rebellion, though often comically exaggerated, subtly shifted perceptions about leadership and identity. She demonstrated that a ruler, or anyone in a position of influence, need not be solemn, measured, or perfect to be effective. Her presence encouraged individuality, autonomy, and the acceptance of unconventional approaches to life and leadership. The ways she affected relationships cannot be understated. Lumpy Space Princess's very nature demanded that those around her adjust, adapt, and often reconsider their own assumptions. Marceline's friendship with her, for example, revealed a shared space where differences were celebrated rather than suppressed. Finn and Bubblegum, in observing her antics and responses, confronted the boundaries of patience, empathy, and understanding. Every social interaction she engaged in created opportunities for reflection, growth, and deeper connection among the other characters. In this sense, her influence extended far beyond herself. It permeated the relational fabric of Ooh. Her legacy is also tied to her symbolic representation. Lumpy Space Princess embodies the tension between self-expression and societal expectation. She reminds us that identity is multifaceted, that growth is nonlinear, and that true value often resides beneath the surface of spectacle or outward bravado. Her story encourages viewers to embrace complexity, to acknowledge contradictions, and to find strength in authenticity. In a world that often rewards conformity, LSP stands as a vibrant emblem of individuality, daring us to celebrate our own lumps, edges, and imperfections. Even the smallest acts she performed contributed to her enduring influence. Whether it was a dramatic speech, an unexpected moment of bravery, or simply expressing her emotions with unapologetic intensity, LSP left traces that shaped the narratives of those around her. Her presence was disruptive, yes, but it was also transformative. She created space for honesty, for vulnerability, and for growth in ways that quieter characters often could not. Her ripple effect is felt not only in the immediate world of Ooh, but in the hearts of those who witness her story unfold. Another important facet of Lumpy Space Princess's legacy is her role as a mirror for self-reflection, both for the characters in Ooh and for those of us watching. Her exaggerated reactions, dramatic flair, and unfiltered honesty often hold up a lens to our own behaviors and tendencies. When we see LSP storming through a scene, demanding attention, or reacting impulsively, it can feel familiar, almost like recognizing a part of ourselves we usually try to hide. In this way, she becomes more than a character. She becomes a reminder of the humanity within each of us, the messy, imperfect, dramatic, and deeply emotional parts that make us who we are. Her story also emphasizes the enduring power of growth. Lumpy Space Princess, despite her flamboyance and chaos, evolves over time. She learns, adapts, and reflects, showing us that transformation is always possible, even for those who seem least likely to change. Her journey encourages viewers to embrace their own capacity for growth, to accept that self-discovery is ongoing, and that hidden depths can emerge in even the most surprising of personalities. Her influence, therefore, extends far beyond the screen. It resonates as a quiet, yet profound lesson about resilience and self-acceptance. Moreover, LSP's interactions with other characters often reveal the value of empathy, patience, and forgiveness. Characters like Finn and Jake are challenged to understand her perspective, even when it seems unreasonable or overblown. Through these interactions, the show demonstrates that meaningful relationships require effort, flexibility, and compassion. Lumpy Space Princess, whether she intends to or not, teaches those around her how to navigate complexity with heart and humor, leaving a legacy that is relational as much as it is personal. Her influence is not limited to moral or emotional lessons. It also extends to cultural impact within Ooh. LSP's uniqueness challenges the norms of appearance, behavior, and status. She exists as a princess who defies expectations, and in doing so, she creates space for others to question rigid structures and embrace their individuality. By simply being herself, flawed, lumpy, dramatic, and unapologetically loud, she reshapes what it means to occupy a role, showing that identity is not constrained by societal definition. Her presence becomes a subtle rebellion, a quiet insistence that worth and value are found in authenticity rather than conformity. Even her moments of vulnerability contribute to her lasting imprint. When she expresses fear, doubt, or longing, she reminds us that strength is not the absence of weakness. It is the ability to persist despite it. Lumpy Space Princess models the courage to face life fully, to experience emotion without shame, and to navigate a world that often misunderstands or underestimates. These moments of openness, though brief and sometimes hidden beneath humor, enrich her character and make her influence enduring. We can also see her legacy in the way she inspires creativity and imagination. Lumpy Space Princess is larger than life, a walking paradox of humor, drama, and wisdom. Her antics and unique personality spark curiosity and wonder, inviting viewers to think beyond conventional storytelling. She encourages an appreciation for complexity in character design, narrative structure, and emotional depth. By embracing her multifaceted nature, Adventure Time encourages us to explore characters who are unconventional, to seek meaning beneath surface appearances, and to value the unpredictable beauty of eccentricity. Finally, her legacy is tied to the way she encourages connection. Lumpy Space Princess, with all her lumps and drama, demonstrates that human or lumpy connection is messy, imperfect, and deeply rewarding. She teaches that bonds are strengthened through understanding, forgiveness, and shared experience, even when conflict arises. Through her relationships, her growth, and her moments of bravery and vulnerability, she leaves behind a world subtly changed, a world that recognizes the significance of those who may initially appear chaotic or misunderstood. As we gently close this chapter, it becomes clear that Lumpy Space Princess's legacy is woven from both her moments of chaos and her moments of quiet revelation. She reminds us that significance is not only measured in grand gestures or heroic deeds, but also in the subtle, lasting effects of presence, personality, authenticity. Every interaction, every laugh she inspires, every tear she sheds, leaves an echo in the lives of those around her. Her legacy is layered, much like her very being, lumpy, colorful, unpredictable, and yet undeniably profound. Her story illustrates a truth that resonates beyond the screen. That being true to oneself, even in the face of misunderstanding or adversity, is one of the most meaningful ways to impact the world. Lumpy Space. Princess demonstrates that imperfections, quirks, and idiosyncrasies are not obstacles to significance. They are part of what makes each individual unique and memorable. Her dramatic flair, once thought frivolous, becomes a lens through which others learn patience, empathy, and the value of embracing difference. In this way, her influence is both subtle and profound, shaping the emotional and moral landscape of Ooh without ever needing to command attention in conventional ways. Moreover, LSP embodies the idea that growth and impact do not require perfection. She makes mistakes, she stumbles, she creates chaos, but through these imperfections, she teaches resilience. She models how to navigate setback, how to engage honestly with others, and how to find strength in vulnerability. Her journey reassures us that even those who appear flawed, chaotic, or dramatic can leave a mark on the world. It is in the messy, unpredictable moments of life that true depth and meaning often emerge, and Lumpy Space, Princess's story, is a testament to that reality. Her influence also extends into the ways she inspires imagination and wonder. Adventure Time, as a world of vibrant creativity, allows characters like LSP to flourish in unconventional ways. She challenges norms, defies expectations, and invites both viewers and other characters to consider alternative forms of heroism, leadership, and identity. In doing so, she enriches the narrative universe of Ooh, offering endless possibilities for interpretation, analysis, and emotional engagement. Lumpy Space, Princess becomes a symbol of the extraordinary potential within the unconventional, the overlooked, and the unpredictable. Even her moments of humor and levity carry lasting significance. Lumpy Space, Princess demonstrates that laughter, joy, and playfulness are forms of strength. By embracing her dramatic, often chaotic personality, she encourages those around her to do the same, to find joy in imperfection, to value spontaneity, and to recognize that life is richer when we allow ourselves to express our authentic selves fully. Her humor is not mere comic relief. It is a vital component of her influence, shaping perspectives and fostering connection in ways that are both immediate and enduring. As we consider the totality of her story, we see a being who has shaped Ooh not through domination, conquest, or rigid authority, but through presence, persistence, and authenticity. Her relationships, her growth, her moments of vulnerability, and her dramatic personality all contribute to a legacy that is uniquely hers. She challenges, she inspires, and she endures, remaining unforgettable because she refuses to be anything other than herself. Lumpy Space, Princess embodies the courage to live authentically, the power of emotional honesty, and the profound impact one can have simply by being present and unapologetically real. Ultimately, Lumpy Space, Princess reminds us that legacy is not defined solely by achievement, fame, or recognition. It is shaped by the ways we touch the lives of others, the authenticity we bring to our existence, and the courage we show in embracing who we truly are. Her story encourages reflection, empathy, and acceptance, both of oneself and of others. She is a vivid reminder that even the most unexpected characters, dramatic, lumpy, or seemingly chaotic, can leave indelible marks on the world, guiding it gently toward understanding, connection, and wonder. So, as we tuck ourselves in tonight, let us carry Lumpy Space, Princess's lessons, quietly with us. Let us remember that authenticity, growth, and connection, messy, imperfect, and unpredictable, are what truly define the lasting impact of a life. Her story, with all its lumps and drama, will linger in the imagination, offering warmth, laughter, and insight long after the lights go out. Good night.